If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Scene of the Crime, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is Zodiac Speaking.
Welcome to this special episode of Zodiac Speaking, a Zodiac podcast. With me is my co-host Richard Grinell and Ned DeHaan, special guest from Black Box Radio Online on YouTube. Thank you both for joining me. I've been excited to have this conversation with you guys.
Hi, Mike. How are you? And hi, Ned.
Yes, hello, Mike. Thanks, Richard. Yes. Hello, Richard. Hello, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been big news, obviously, lately, and I figured we'd get the three of us together because, you know, I know between the three of us, we've covered this case a lot. We've written about it. We've dissected it. We've done, you know, Ned, I know you've done a lot of YouTube stuff on it. So, you know, the three of us getting together, I think we can explore a lot of angles and theories and possibilities. And, you know, we also asked people on ZodiacKiller.com to chime in and, you know, bring up some theories, questions, things they want to talk about as well. So, you know, during this episode, we'll sort of cover some of those things and give our thoughts on those. But I guess, you know, we'll start with Ned, you're our guest. What are your thoughts first about this discovery that Donna Lass's remains have been found?
Well, firstly, thanks again for inviting me to do this, Mike. And if anyone out there hasn't heard of me before, my name is Ned DeHaan. I'm the host of Black Box Online Radio, as Mike said, on YouTube, exclusively on YouTube now, but we'll see about that in the future. And my first thing to share is just that when I started doing a regular segment about Donna Lass in 2021 on YouTube, I found that there was not exactly the same amount of press and the same amount of coverage on her case compared to some of the other unconfirmed victims. And I found that it was a big challenge to go through the information and actually try and find out what happened to Donna on the day prior to her disappearance, around the time of her disappearance. All types of misinformation are on the internet. And the news is that Donna Lass's remains were found in 1986. 37 years later, they were identified via DNA, and they have skeletal fragments and a skull that was found. Originally, the jawbone was found by an individual who was hiking through the area in Placer County, California. And I think that this is an amazing discovery, and we know what happened to Donna. We know where she ended up, and she didn't run away and start a new life like some people theorized. But people have so many more questions. Firstly, how did she die? Secondly, was she murdered by the Zodiac Killer? Is there a real, genuine Zodiac Killer connection to Lake Tahoe? And those are some very challenging questions because I think that Morph and Richard might have experienced some similar things. When looking at the disappearance of Donna Lass, there isn't a lot of physical evidence to go off of, whereas in some of the other crimes where the killer attacked somebody and left the body there are so many things you could analyze. We're talking about boot prints, or in the case of Sherry Jo Bates, there was a watch band that was torn off. And with Donna Lass, none of that stuff was present. She was just known as the woman who simply vanished. And it wasn't until 2023 that her remains were positively identified. But no matter what, I'm thankful that Donna has been found. I hope her family can receive some closure and just one more step to actually finding her killer and finding out what happened to Donna.
Yeah, all good points and a lot of things to consider. What are your thoughts, Rich?
Well, I suppose the interest in the Donna Lass case is varied. Some people believe she was a Zodiac victim and others don't. So this is probably why this case hasn't been covered quite as much as other aspects of the Zodiac case. But having said that, she's probably received a lot more than some of the victims who have gone missing in that area because of the Zodiac case. And I suspect that nobody ever thought that this case was going to find some sort of resolution. Last December, we suspected we'd never hear anything about this case, probably ever. So this is quite astounding news, really.
Oh, absolutely. When I heard it, I was, I sort of took the week off for the holiday, so I wasn't even checking my phone. And I got a text from somebody saying, "Hey, you got to see this. They found Donna Lass's remains." And I jump on there and I see this news release, and I couldn't believe it. I thought at this point they'd never find a shred of her. And the fact that they've found the skull, which is literally like finding a needle in a haystack when you consider all that wilderness out there, to find it is amazing. But then it only leads to more questions because, all right, now we know that they've had her skull for a long time. Why wasn't it identified sooner? And it only leads to more questions that have never been answered popping to the surface again for me. So for me, this is only a small part of the mystery. It's reigniting a lot of questions that I have and continue to go unanswered. So I am curious, and I know you put a lot of thought into this, Rich, as far as that Clear Tappan Lodge, which is not terribly far away from this. What were your thoughts on that, and what kind of theory did you have on that for listeners that are not familiar with that?
Well, that depends on whether you've read any of my last few articles, because I've found a lot more information recently, but of course, it's in hindsight of the discovery. But it's got me wondering so much more now. I've never believed the Zodiac Killer was responsible for Donna Lass. Could never have ruled him out, but I was highly doubtful that he was responsible. But I always believed pretty much 100% that he was responsible for the Pines card. But the recent discoveries I've made or interpretations of the Pines card has put me in a sort of state of flux now, where I believe the author of the Pines card is probably her murderer, but that would mean it's the Zodiac Killer from my interpretation, and I don't really want to believe that at the moment. So I'm in a state of uncertainty. Let's put it that way.
And just for listeners that haven't read your article or heard your theory before about that lodge, can you just tell people a little bit of a backstory about that lodge and why you thought that might play a role in Donna's case somehow?
Well, I'll do a little brief summary of something recently, but again, you must remember this is in hindsight, so I'm not claiming this is an answer. But I looked at the Pines card again, and what I noticed was that he wrote around in the snow upside down. And and we've all assumed that and the punch hole were maybe where she was buried. So I interpreted that we may have to turn the card round. And when we do that, we have got the we've got the Sierra Club paste up on the card. And to the west of that is now the punch hole. And we know that her body was found west of the Sierra Club Claire Tappan Lodge. So I did a little bit more digging, and I know that a US postcard is 5.8 inches, and I know he gave us a map scale when he sent us the Phillips 66 map about Mount Diablo, and that was 6.4 miles to the inch. So what I did was I measured the distance between the Sierra Club on the postcard and the center of the punch hole, and it measured, let me remember, how much did it measure? It measured let me just, can't remember the exact dimensions. It measured 2.39 inches between the Sierra Club and that punch hole, which worked out with that map scale I've just given you to 15.3 miles. So I went onto Google Maps and I looked at the distance between Claire Tappan Lodge Sierra Club and where her body was found near Camp Spalding, and it measured exactly 15.3 miles. And that got me thinking, was this card specifically designed to show the location of her burial site? And what you've got to remember is, why did he choose Incline Village to paste onto that card in the first place? It may have been a template of directions, because remember, he said, you know where Incline Village is, on the slightly on the right side at the top of the lake. And he said past Lake Tahoe areas, and then he gave us Claire Tappan Lodge. So if those were directions, we are traveling due west. And of all the places in Nevada and California, he's pointing in a direction towards Camp Spalding and Yuba Gap. So that got me thinking, did the killer actually design this card?
It's interesting because that, the chances of her remains being found where they were and lining up so perfectly, it seems like the odds would just be against that randomly happening.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's the answer. I'm saying it's just an idea I came up with in hindsight, and that's always open to skepticism. But it's got me thinking now, and I'm still digging a little deeper into it. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and for a case that a lot of people have sort of said, well, maybe it's just taking credit for it, it definitely causes you to rethink, could she actually be a Zodiac victim? And then if so, how did he arrive at picking her as a victim? How did she come across his path? And then, you can go down all kinds of rabbit holes because, of course, she had a cousin or second cousin living in Vallejo, and he was married to a girl named Donna. So, just start looking at these weird things that pop up. And she had gone to Vallejo too. So did she know the Zodiac, if she's a Zodiac victim, from her time in Vallejo or through her family in Vallejo?
And why would he pick Sierra Club to post onto that card if it has no meaning? And we know Claire Tappan Lodge is only 15 miles from Yuba Gap and Camp Spalding. And that's as a standalone argument is pretty close, considering where the killer could have disposed of a body anywhere, east, west, north, or south, anywhere in Nevada or California. So this is pretty close. And like I said, he did direct us from Incline Village past the last Lake Tahoe areas. So it's very curious, and it's got me thinking deep and hard about this now, and maybe to reassess my opinion on whether the Zodiac killer was responsible for her murder.
What do you think, Ned? Has this changed the needle for you at all as far as what you think or have thought about Donna's case?
Absolutely, it has changed things. Now, listeners of Black Box Online Radio will know that I state very clearly that I don't think any of the unconfirmed crimes were the Zodiac Killer, not the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates, not the Domingos Edwards murders, although the Domingos Edwards murders has the highest chance of being Zodiac related, in my opinion. I put Donna Lass very low on the likelihood of having anything to do with the Zodiac Killer, with the exception of the card, of course. I mean, you got a card that has geographic connections to the area, other than that, other than just communications. But I've been reading the articles on Richard Grinell's website, zodiacciphers.com, and everything that Richard has laid out does suggest that there could be some genuine connection. In the past, I didn't think this was the Zodiac Killer because the Zodiac just didn't seem like he's showing any signs of actually going through with an abduction. The Kathleen Johns incident is another attempted abduction by some predator. I also don't think that that was the Zodiac Killer. I have so many doubts about that story. And I just think that there's a very different type of criminal behavior that would be the type of person to sneak up on teenagers, fire some gunshots, and run away, or even stabbing them with a knife, versus someone who's actually going to abduct a woman, murder her, and transport her body to a different location. I mean, this is very, very different type, a very different type of behavior. But I should point out that I was fairly optimistic in the past that we might get some answers, not all the answers. And in 2021, I started that regular segment about the disappearance of Donna Lass. Every Thursday, I would do an episode, and I found all of these different theorists that had this set of predictions, if you will. Ray Grant had a very detailed theory about what happened to Donna Lass. Ann Penn, author of Serial Slaughter Zodiac Killer, talked about how she believed Donna Lass was buried at a place called Rubicon Point near Lake Tahoe. And of course, the case breakers had their own theory. Dale Julin had a very precise theory. But the problem is, though, Dale Julin's theory was that Donna Lass was buried eastward, to the east of Lake Tahoe. I mean, he had this whole detailed explanation that she's buried like 4 miles east of State Line, Nevada, or wherever it was. But as Richard stated, all of that is false, completely false. Her skeletal remains were found on the west side of Lake Tahoe, and a substantial distance from Lake Tahoe. I mean, the amount of miles, I would say, into California, it's a substantial distance. Now, I am rethinking everything. Is it possible the Zodiac actually committed other murders and took credit for it? And it's quite possible now. Quite possible.
Yeah, so we have to look at other, potential cases maybe in that area. And to me it jumps out. It's not in the backyard of Vallejo. It's quite a drive to get out there. So why there? What's the connection if it is Zodiac? And again, that's a big if, but if it is Zodiac, how and why is he out there in that area? But for me, this just really opens up a whole lot of new questions, or brings up new questions. For example, I go back to the whole disappearance itself. The police can't even clearly say, or haven't said, maybe they know and they just haven't said, if Donna made it out of the casino the night she vanished. There's a lot of has been made of the pen trailing off the paper. Well, it sounds sinister, but who knows? Maybe she was just tired and wanted to get out of there. And so we don't know if she ever made it out. I think it's possible she could have been harmed or abducted while in the casino, but then again, I think it's just as likely she got out of the casino and something happened to her. But it brings up more questions because we don't know. We don't even know if she drove to work that day or walked that day, or if she did she make it out to her car? Her car was found obviously back at her home. So if so, did she drive it there? Did she make it back and something happened to her at the apartment? Just so many questions there. I mean, for me, it would answer a lot if we could determine if she drove to work that day and her car wound up back at her apartment. Well, there's two possibilities. Either she made it back to her apartment and something happened to her, or somebody else drove it there. But to me, that would answer part of the mystery. And I don't know if the police know that precisely and know that she made it home or out of that casino. They just haven't said a lot, unfortunately. So it's left us to sort of speculate on what happened.
Was the casino a 24-hour opening hours? And if
Yes.
so, she must have handed over to another nurse at 2 a.m. then, I would have thought. And why haven't we heard anything about this handover and the scenario surrounding that?
You know anything about how many nurses they employed, and if they were around 24 hours a day there, Ned?
I don't know how many nurses they employed, but from everything that I've gathered, it was 24 hours, and that's why the shifts were arranged. Donna's working the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift, and then you have a 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift, and then there's the 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. shifts. So Donna really was more or less the night crew. She was the night nurse. Now, as far as where was Donna abducted, when I was reading Ray Grant's book, and this is the only book that I found that shared this information, he stated that more than a week after Donna's disappearance, they found a bag in the nurse's station that had Donna's nurse's shoes with muddied bottoms, which indicated that she had walked to work on the day of her disappearance. And as we've said, she goes missing at maybe 1:45, 1:50 in the morning on September 6th of 1970. So that's right at the end of her shift. And I've always thought that she changed into a different type of shoe that she was going to wear while she was going to be sitting in the casino for a while. And I give credit to Morph, who has uncovered a lot of this information. He was the one who told me that Donna was afraid of the dark and she liked to sit at the tables in the casino until it got light out. And, that's only being smart and responsible on her part. So I think maybe she was changing her clothes already, getting ready to leave. And she has one final entry to write in the book. So have you guys have not heard any other corroborating evidence for that or any other supporting points that her nurse's shoes were found in the first aid station?
No, I haven't heard anything or seen anything verifying that at all. That's just what you just explained is my knowledge of that.
We actually don't know when she went missing. She was last seen about 1:15 a.m. by Joan Bentley. And since then,
1:15?
1:15 Joan Bentley, wasn't it?
I read
Yeah.
it was 1:40 a.m. Is it 1:15?
No, that's the time that's the time 1:50 that she was deemed missing or left.
You're right. I read that she was witnessed at 1:40 a.m. by Joan Bentley. She's supposed to write the entry in her book at 1:45 a.m., but that's the incomplete one. And by 2 a.m., we have no idea what's happened to Donna.
We don't know actually she went missing at 1:45 or 1:50 because we can't prove that she didn't leave the casino willingly and walked home. I know that it's been reported that she didn't like walking home in the dark on her own, but we can't totally rule it out. She could have gone home, gone to bed, made her bed, got up the next day and went missing the next day for all we know. All we know is 1:45 or 1:50 is the last reported time.
That brings up so many questions. And again, in Ray Grant's Zodiac Killer Solved, he put out his theory that he thought that it was an abduction. Either the abductor or somebody else, like an accomplice, comes to Donna and says, "Hey, my family member's having an emergency in the parking lot. You're the nurse, right? Please come quick." Somebody just lures her outside using one of the back entrances or back exits, rather, to the Sahara Tahoe Hotel. And then they just abducted her in the parking lot. And opportunistic predators do things like that all the time. And that's a plausible theory. I don't necessarily agree with Ray Grant's suspects, but I do think that that's a reasonable possibility.
I think Mike and I probably agree that she was abducted by somebody she knew. Is that a fair assessment, Mike?
Yeah, and the reason I think that it's just a theory of mine that if, and I know this is coming to question now, if there was really a caller that said, "Hey, she's not going to be at work because there's a medical emergency back home in South Dakota and she won't be in," that's come under a little bit of questioning due to some confusion. But if that call really came in, if a guy called in and said Donna will not be at work because of this family emergency, and there was no family emergency, if a stranger had just picked her up off the street, there's simply no reason for them to call and delay anything. They're not connected to her. The only theory that makes sense to me is that they would do that because they are somebody that's in her inner circle, and they needed to buy time. They needed to stall, either to get rid of her body, to get rid of evidence, to get their story straight, to give them time for something, because they knew the police would eventually be coming to them to talk to them. So to me, that's the only reason they would need to make that call in the first place, is if they were connected to her. I just don't see any reason why a stranger would need to do that at all, inject themselves into the case and risk a clue that might lead to them being identified.
But it
Now,
begs.
Mike.
Oh, sorry.
well,
Can I just quickly say it begs the question?
Of course, go ahead.
Say you were the friend of Donna Lass and you wanted to abduct her for nefarious reasons. Why would you do it in a populated casino with probably many people around? Why not wait for a more opportune moment by her where she lived, or when she was walking down the road one day, or in the evening? Why would you pick a populated casino to do an abduction or a ruse?
Yeah, me personally, I wouldn't. I would just wait till I had her in a spot where, if she knows me and she trusts me. And it's kind of hard to talk like this because I'm not somebody that's going to abduct somebody, but I'm trying to put myself in the mind of somebody that might do that. I would wait till I'm alone with them. I'm not going to do it while there's a chance. And that brings back my point of, we don't know what happened. For all we know, she got a ride home from the casino that night with somebody that ultimately did this to her. We just don't know. And that's why I think it's an important clue to find out, did she make it out of the casino? Is there, did she clock out? What's the process? Things haven't been released. Is there a nurse that came along that's supposed to sign off and say, "All right, I'm taking over now, go home"? We've never heard any of this stuff, so we don't know for sure whether she made it out of there. But if she did, any number of things could have happened. She could have made it home and then was attacked by someone she knew or a stranger, or she could have been given a ride home by somebody she trusted who ultimately attacked her.
Okay, I think those are all really good points. And to answer Richard's question first about why would somebody who knew Donna Lass abduct her from the Sahara Tahoe Hotel when they could do that in a much more secluded area where they would be less likely to be witnessed? Now, the thing that I've explored in the past was if it had been somebody like a maintenance man or a security guard who had a very strong knowledge of the hotel, they'd be familiar with dead spots or places that are authorized entry only, that would be off limits to the guests of the hotel and the guests of the casino. So someone who might have had a little bit of knowledge. But the question that I was going to ask Mike was, can you share any more information about this phone call that came in that might not have actually happened, or there's some lack of clarity in the situation?
Yeah, so and this is all coming out of a private investigator's report, and there's a news article that mentioned, for example, she was last seen with a blonde man. Well, if you look in the private investigator's report, a witness thought they saw her hours after she supposedly was at the casino walking on Pioneer Trail with a blonde man. So to me, I'm thinking that's where that's coming from, this witness statement. Now, some people have questioned whether she actually saw her on the right day and maybe that was a different day. My thinking is she just moved to Pioneer, to that trail, that Monteverdi Apartments, literally a day before she went missing, and that's right around Pioneer Trail. Before that, she had lived further away from Pioneer Trail. So to me, I'm thinking there's a good possibility this witness actually saw her the day she says she saw her, which is hours after she was at the casino. And if that's the case, then we know she made it out of the casino because she's walking down the middle of the road with this blonde guy. And if that's the case, who is this blonde guy? How does she know him? Assuming she's not been abducted by him because she's walking with him. And, that leads to the question, how do we identify this blonde guy she was walking with?
Now it's Richard, go ahead.
Sorry. Based on the private investigator's report, we came to the conclusion that Nick Davis, the landlord, did not receive any suspicious calls. So we can pretty much rule that one out. The only other one we're looking at is the other call made to the Sahara Tahoe Hotel. And I think it was Gordon Petrovich.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another confusing thing, because it had been reported that both the apartment manager and Donna's work received these calls, but it clarified a little bit that the apartment guy didn't receive a call. But then there was confusion excuse me, about how the information was relayed at Donna's work, and if there's some kind of mix up in the exchange there. And later on, there was in the report, and the report's not really well written, so it's a little confusing, but it looks almost as if somebody along the line saying, well, somebody suggested it, that maybe it was she had a family emergency. And so it's very confusing. It's not very precise. And I think this is where, if we had access to Donna's actual police reports, we'd probably find some of these answers. We'd probably know for sure some of these things that we're wondering about now, or picking at this this report that we do have access to, and maybe it would clarify some of those things.
And Gordon Petrovich said he got the call on the 7th or the 8th, didn't he, Mike? So that wouldn't make any sense from a standpoint of buying time by somebody ringing in who had abducted Donna Lass, would it?
Well, and again, because it's secondhand information, is he remembering her correctly? Now, she was last seen on the 6th, early morning of the 6th. So I mean, it could theoretically, I mean, if she wasn't supposed to work, let's say, till the next night, and maybe she wasn't even supposed to work at all, because Joanne, according to her, was coming to see her that night, and she never showed up. So at some point, maybe they knew they had so much time before anybody was looking for her, and then they decided to buy more time, because they knew people would eventually be missing her, and maybe Joanne wouldn't be able to find her and she'd start poking around. Maybe the next time Donna was supposed to work, she wouldn't be there, so that some work would start poking around. So maybe they knew at some point they needed to buy time. So I think it still could be possible that that person was buying time, and trying to get the police to delay looking for her and coming around and asking questions.
Okay, now there's something that I would like to also ask about, and that is that I've stated at the beginning that there's a lot of misinformation about the specifics of Donna's case out on the internet. And one of them is that I've seen in almost every article that talks about the sighting of the blonde man that occurred on September 7th of 1970, which would be a minimum of 20 hours after Donna's supposed to get off work. So, I mean, if that's the case, I've always thought that that was just pure fiction or a false witness sighting. If that timeline is indeed true, have you guys found anything that would suggest that that witness sighting actually occurred on September 6th?
No, not besides what's in the police report. It's indicated that it's the 7th, and to me that's a huge thing, because if it is the 7th, I mentioned that before, then that shows that Donna's alive after that last time she was seen at the casino. Now, the person could be misremembering it, and it's the day before, but then it begs to the question again. She literally just moved to that street the day before. So would she have had time to be walking down the street with some guy? And I think it's still important to identify that guy and figure out who it is. And hopefully the police maybe did and question him. If not, that could be one of the people they want to talk to, because it could be a key witness. And as far as I know, as far as we can tell, he has not been identified.
A newspaper.
Okay, then.
Sorry, I just
Go ahead,
quickly.
Richard.
A newspaper article mentioned her being seen in the company of a blonde man by her apartment on the 7th. And bearing in mind, we still don't know when technically she went missing, this is still a possibility, although I understand why people suspect this is incorrect information, or the person who spotted the two together have probably got their dates wrong, but it's still in theory possible.
Okay,
Yeah.
and also very quickly, I first have to make the comment that I think that it would be extremely bizarre for them to have this type of 24-hour system, or even just if it's not, no matter what, for Donna to just leave 10 minutes early from work when she's not supposed to, if she's the only nurse on duty. I can only see that coming back to just absolutely bite a worker in the behind. That just seems like something that would be completely abnormal. Normally in jobs like that, there's a shift change, there's a brief conference that takes like 2 or 3 minutes. Oh, how'd everything go? And that's always suggested to me that Donna might have been either lured out on some type of false premise, or maybe she voluntarily left because somebody showed up and wanted to talk to her. So I think it's very bizarre that she wasn't witnessed at 2 a.m. if somebody else is taking over. So that stands out to me. Now, about this issue of the of like, is this, how would Donna have this witness sighting near her apartment if she's only lived there for one day? I think that could be explained very easily, that there could be somebody that she was seeing over the course of the summer, and she's keeping him in touch, keeping him in the loop. Oh yeah, I'm moving on this and this date. I'm now going to be living in the Monteverde apartment complex near Pioneer Trail. And people share things like that with their friends. So that's also doesn't seem like it's out of the question if this is a guy that has some familiarity with Donna's life and her behavior. And I mean, it could also be that there was a real guy, and we know that she was dating at least one guy, right, Mike? So maybe this is him, or this is somebody else whom she's sharing this information with. But as I think I've made my stance clear, I've kind of doubted a lot of the things about this witness sighting. I don't personally find it credible. I could be wrong, but I think either the witness got confused, or I think that maybe the sighting was just a piece of fiction that didn't actually happen. But that's just my take on the subject.
Do we know
Unfortunately, I was just gonna say, unfortunately, that is a big it's either a big red herring or it's a big clue, one way or the other. And if they could just identify that person, whoever it is, they could question him and say, why were you with her? What were you doing? Where were you going? What are your plans? What's your relationship? But we just don't know if that was ever done, if they were ever able to identify them. There is mention of her dating people in the report that we have, but it doesn't go into real specifics. I don't know if they're identified, fully as to who they were. They're just general things about them.
Do we know for certain where her nurse's uniform was found? Because I could understand a nurse changing into her normal clothes just prior to her shift ending so she can get away dead on 2 o'clock. So do we know exactly where her nurse's uniform was found?
I don't know that.
Neither do I. I have not found. I don't recall anything immediately about the location of her nurse's uniform. Also, giving a shout out to a listener of BBR Classic Chevy Cat who asked a really good question. Now, was her purse found in the nurse's station? Was a nurse's first aid kit or first aid bag found in the station? That should also answer some questions about, was she interrupted while she was working, or did she voluntarily leave? I mean, you would expect if her purse were found in the nurse's station, I think that would suggest an abduction at the Sahara Tahoe. If the purse was taken with her, that could raise a few more questions.
Yeah, and this is where the police reports having access to them would come in handy, because I'm sure, or I would hope at least, that the police reports do have all this information. Purse was located here, clothing was located here. Maybe they even have pictures in there. But then again, if they don't really know she's missing right away, if it's not official that she's missing, does stuff get moved around? Did somebody find it and just put it in a different location thinking, oh, she just forgot it, I'll put it here so when she comes back to work she can have it? So those are the things we don't know, what things were found where, and if they were moved and that kind of thing.
And I also find it very strange that if you were a random killer who wanted to abduct a woman for whatever reasons, and we can probably guess what those reasons might be, why you would pick that casino. You've got any option of a woman coming out of a club late at night, anytime walking down the street late at night. This is an easy opportunity for any person to abduct a woman if they so choose. So why would a random killer target a main building and go into a building with a ruse when there's so many more easy options to take?
Yeah, I personally don't buy that theory. I don't think somebody abducted her inside the casino. I mean, could they have lured her outside? My brother-in-law just slipped and banged his head in the parking lot. Can you come out to help him? I mean, something like that gets her out of the building. I could see a possibility where she did get out after her shift and she's walking out to her car or walking home or whatever she's doing to get home. She gets out of the building and in the dark, somebody attacks her. I can see that theory happening. As a matter of fact, there was, and it's mentioned in the police report, there was a woman who was attacked in a parking lot of I think it was that same casino, not long before Donna went missing. So, is that connected? Is there somebody that was sort of hanging out, waiting for a lone woman in the middle of the night to leave that casino and to pounce on them? You never know what a predator's capable of, or where they're going to stalk their next victim at.
Absolutely. And Mike, I think that you just answered the question very easily, because what type of person would abduct a woman from a populated hotel and casino? Well, one of the reasons why Donna took that job, as I've read, is that she wanted to work independently. She wasn't really her own boss, but she's the only person working at the nurse's station, and it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. And no matter what, no matter how busy a casino is, there are going to be fewer people than there will be at like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. at night. Somebody might have noticed a woman in a vulnerable place, and maybe they knew where the exit door was, their vehicle is close by, or as Mike said, lured her out. I don't endorse that type of abduction theory, but I've definitely entertained the idea.
There was a woman killed at the Cal Never casino 10 months later. and the busboy who was eventually charged in that murder and jailed, I think, for 47 years. He told police that she was abducted. He saw, and he was an eyewitness and saw her abducted by somebody in the parking lot of that casino, which is a very curious statement, bearing in mind this was 10 months after the disappearance of Donna Lass from outside the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. So I don't know if he got his idea from that crime or what, but he certainly wasn't the, well, what had he got anything to do with the abduction of Donna Lass? I don't know.
Yeah. And you know, a casino at night, those hours, especially after midnight, there's not a lot of people out there. It's dark. Even today, you know, people looking to do a quick robbery, somebody coming out of the casino thinks maybe they just won some money, or they're targeting a woman and they know they're alone. There's not going to be many witnesses. And back then there wasn't the kind of surveillance there is now. So it would be that much harder to be caught, you know, at night. And if this same crime happened today, you know, there's so many cameras in casinos that I think it would be very, very highly likely that they'd be able to pinpoint every movement of Donna coming and going to the casino, whether she made it outside, whether she got into a car. I think they'd be able to tell all of that with no question if this crime happened today. So, you know, unfortunately, I think back then there just wasn't that kind of surveillance to see every move that was made and whether she made it out and what happened if she did get out.
What do you both think about the timing? This was coming to the end of her shift and it was 2 a.m. in the morning. So if she was abducted outside the casino or thereabouts, does that suggest she was targeted as a victim?
Be targeted by somebody who had some familiarity with her schedule if they're waiting until 2 a.m. specifically to abduct Donna Lass. I mean, that person would at least have to know her working hours. Now, it could be a coincidence that it was just some type of unknown abductor who just happened to get her at 1:50 a.m., 1:45 a.m. But then is also just the possibility that they saw her wrapping up, you know, changed out of her clothes, maybe like folding papers, opening up the notebook and such, giving the signs that she was closing down. Oh, okay, she's about to leave. She's done some things that have drawn attention to herself. And I mean, those are possibilities, but I think you'd have to say the person knew her schedule if they specifically targeted her because it was 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And and again, I go back to maybe it's somebody that was there to pick her up and give her a ride home. So she said, "Be here at 2 o'clock. I'll meet you out in the parking lot," and then that could explain why they're there. Then again, it could be somebody totally random that just happened to be there at that time and was going to attack the first woman they saw alone, and it just happened to be Donna. Now, I want to point out statistically, people that meet with foul play way more often than not are attacked by somebody they know. The chances of being attacked by a total stranger or meeting a serial killer out in the parking lot are slim. Statistically, you know, the person that's attacked knows the person. So my thinking is just my theory. I don't have any proof. I think she got out of the casino that night without a problem and either in the parking lot got into a ride with somebody she knew. I think the odds are that's most likely what happened. And from there, something happened. Or I think she made it home and to her apartment, something happened. But I think statistically, she knew her killer because that's typically what happens. People that are murdered know the person that did it to them. They're not killed by strangers.
Yeah, it's a bit like Judith Hikari. She left her work at the hospital and she got home and was abducted basically when she parked up. And now we know that was there was a good chance that the person that abducted her knew her movements and when she was arriving home. And we know with the other crime of Nancy Benelak, Richard John Davis was convicted of her murder and he lived close by. So it certainly could be somebody familiar with the schedule of Donna Lass.
But I do need to point out, though, as even though it's very unlikely that someone would be targeted by a serial killer, we also have the Zodiac Killer and the Zodiac connection. And for the overwhelming majority of Zodiac victims, it appears that they didn't have a personal connection to the killer. It's quite possible that none of the Zodiac victims had a connection to the killer. And even though I put the Zodiac as a low suspect in the past, now kind of an intermediate suspect, that would provide an explanation about why there isn't this big paper trail leading back to somebody that she knew. If it indeed was the Zodiac, it seems like he targeted victims that he didn't personally know.
Yeah. I mean, and that is his MO, is to just randomly attack people where he found them.
And the only connection we've got between the Zodiac Killer and Donna Lass are his insinuations in the Pines card. That's it, really. There's no other evidence of any involvement from the Zodiac Killer, is there? So
now, and I think we also have to remember there were multiple predators operating in that area around that time. The guy's name is escaping me, but there was at least one serial killer who attacked several women in that area. Yeah,
yes.
Yep, that's him. So, and I think there were a couple more, if I remember correctly. There was also a couple different, I don't remember their names, but there were two, and I'm going forward a little bit into the late 70s, 80s. There were some other casino workers who were killed.
82.
So, yeah,
it was
and
Billy Chosso and Marilyn Putt from Harrah's Casino.
Yes, and they were abducted at the same time, disappeared at the same time, and were found two different times. Their remains were found at separate locations, separate times. So, I mean, it was clearly a place where predators operated, and again, it's not really populated. There's lots of woods to take somebody and do whatever you're going to do and leave their remains. So I think it makes sense that it could be a predator. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that knew these women. It could be that they did run into a stranger who was a predator. But then again, even somebody that knows them and wants to get rid of their bodies could also do it and dispose of it in the same areas that these serial killers do.
So then I would like to ask both of you, why don't we just address this one right now? What do you think about Lawrence Kane as a suspect for the disappearance of Donna Lass? And this is a two-part question because I've had the opportunity to interview Jeremy Berthume, author of the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses, and his theory about the disappearance of Donna Lass was that Lawrence Kane was not the Zodiac Killer, but what happened was he believes that Lawrence Kane abducted Kathleen Johns and the whole ride-along was true, but then she said that the Zodiac poster on the wall of a police station looked like her abductor. So Lawrence Kane learned about that from the papers and was like, hey, this Zodiac guy looks like me. So he committed a murder, knowing fully well that he could blame it on the Zodiac, and he was the one who fabricated the Pines card. And that definitely is a two-part question. I hope it comes that way, because I know you guys are going to have some stronger opinions just about Lawrence Kane as a Donna Lass abducting suspect. So what do you think?
For me, I don't buy Lawrence Kane in any way, shape, or form being Zodiac whatsoever. And as far as Donna Lass, I just don't see anything that connects him. I mean, if it'd be one thing if you could prove that they had a connection, that they worked together, that he lived in the same apartment complex. I mean, something along those lines, I would say, okay, I take him a lot more serious, but I don't see anything that connects him solidly. So right now it's just a theory that somebody's got out there with no connections.
You got to remember that Kathleen Johns identified a person aged about 30 and Lawrence Kane was 45 years of age in 1970. The only other connection is obviously the claim by Harvey Hines that he worked at the Sahara Tahoe, and he lived in Eddy Street, which was not too far away from where Paul Stine began his final journey.
Right. So I think Lawrence Kane's a very weak Zodiac suspect, but I do want to point out that Sandy Betts attended a reunion, an anniversary party at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and she claims that she talked to people who said that Donna Lass did indeed know Lawrence Kane. Now that is almost like hearsay. That is secondhand, third-hand information. So I just want to point out that someone does attempt to corroborate that, even though we can't verify it 100%.
Do you
I mean,
think
if that was, I was just going to say, if that was in a police report that they that there was some kind of police investigation that connected them, I'd believe that. But to me, that's just secondhand hearsay.
Right. Storytelling versus documented evidence.
Yeah.
You think that the Zodiac Killer just claimed Donna Lass because he read the news reports in September and knew that she worked at the Letterman Hospital in the Presidio where he was last seen heading, and by claiming her, by tying the two areas of South Lake Tahoe and Presidio Heights together, it bolsters his case of being responsible for the abduction of Donna Lass.
Yeah, I think he was somebody that capitalized on news stories, and just loosely connecting himself to them. So I wouldn't put it past him to get involved in Donna's case and try and take credit for it.
Yes, I've thought so in the past as well. I mean, my exact take on the subject was, I think the Zodiac Killer was mostly telling the truth after the murder of Paul Stein when he says, I will not announce my crimes in the same way because it'll slow down my collecting of slaves. I'm going to disguise them as routine robberies and accidents and so on. And that's why he's only vaguely alluding to himself actually committing those crimes. And that's a big reason why I thought none of the Zodiac possible crimes were actually the same person, because he is just taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit, because if there isn't proof, I was like, it's not him. That was just my pure assessment of the situation, my unprofessional assessment of the situation. So that's what I thought the Donna Lass story was. That just the Zodiac Killers learned some basic information about that. I've mostly thought that the Pines card was authentic, and that it's just, again, connecting himself to the Lake Tahoe region, even though there's no proof whatsoever that he actually committed the crime. And I was like, he's not proving it. He's most likely making it up. I think the Zodiac did this numerous times. I don't think he had any real Riverside activity. I don't think that he had a bomb that he was going to detonate. I think that those were just wild stories. And then Donna Lass's remains were found, and everything that Richard shared in the beginning pointed toward the Pines card could very well likely have come from the killer. And maybe that killer was the Zodiac, because that's actually pointing us in the right geographic direction. Rethinking a lot of things right now.
Yeah, and again, to pick that spot out of all the area around, where she vanished from, to be that close seems like an awfully big coincidence.
Like you said, he insinuated in many crimes. He did it with Sherry Joe Bates. He did it with Snoozy and Furlong. And we know that Carl Francis Werner was responsible for the Snoozy and Furlong murders. So he was proved to be a liar in that case. And that sheds a lot of doubt on his claims to Donna Lass, Sherry Joe Bates, etc. So, and like you said, Ned, he said Riverside activity. Could he be just half claiming the letters rather than the murder? He's leaving his options open.
Sure.
Right. Everything gets very vague. Like after the murder of Paul Stein, everything is just not very specific. So I just thought that was somebody like doing a bunch of wheel spinning. He's just like kind of trying to make people second guess everything. It's creating the image of terror, which is what the Zodiac wanted. Like anytime there's a crime, well, was that the Zodiac Killer? And guess what? He succeeded, because 50 some odd years later, every crime in the second half of the 20th century has a Zodiac connection.
Yeah. And if you look at the confirmed Zodiac crimes where he writes letters about the ones we know he did, they're very detailed. They're very precise. He's in, a couple instances, he's mailing shirt pieces. So you can't get any more spot on than that, connecting yourself to the crime. But in these ones that he's not confirmed to have done, there's so much more vagueness to the correspondences, that because it seems to me he's probably just picking what he can glean out of a newspaper, and he doesn't have any inside information to provide police with that proves that he's the killer.
I looked recently, Mike, at the Forest Pines at Incline thing, like we mentioned earlier, where he got the advertisement from. And we know he capitalized peak through the pines. So there's a fair chance, I think most people have concluded, he got it from the Examiner or the Chronicle. So I took a look at the Examiner newspaper recently on newspapers.com, and he got that Forest Pines at Incline from page 15 of the March the 19th, 1971 newspaper. So I traveled back through it, and on page 9, there's the correct size for a headline saying Sierra Club backs park tax boost. So that's probably where he got the Sierra Club paste up from. And then I traveled a little bit further, and there was another article in the Examiner again on January the 28th, and it said bids sought for wharf development, and that was the correct size as well. And the most curious one, if you notice on the Pines card, he doesn't use separate words. It's one statement, around in the snow. It's not made from several cut pieces. So around in the snow is not easy to find. I went onto newspapers.com and I only found one single entry for around in the snow, and that was from the Examiner again on January the 6th. So is there a possibility he was preparing this card as early as January the 6th for its mailing on March the 22nd? Because this seems to be where he's harvesting his material for the Pines card from the San Francisco Examiner.
That's
Firstly, I want
interesting.
to say, Richard, that's incredible. I mean, that's an incredible find on your part. That's all I wanted to say. Over to you, Mike.
And it's a good segue to something I wanted to ask you guys about, because the Peek Through the Pines card, sent March 22nd, 1971, could that be connected to the Christmas card sent to Donna Lass's family in 1974? Because they wrote, Guardian of the Pines in that Christmas card, and Peek Through the Pines is what was sent in 1971. So this is either somebody that remembers that, hey, back in 1971, the Zodiac used Peek Through the Pines in this letter I saw in the newspaper, and they were just sending a card to Donna's family and happened to say, let me use that same thing. Or it's possible the same person also sent that, and they're hinting at Pines specifically. What do you guys think about that Christmas card?
Okay,
Well,
so to start off, the year of 1974, I think, is absolutely fascinating for Zodiac communications, because we've had a halt in Zodiac activity for 2 years, 72 and 73, no confirmed communications. Then it actually looks like in 1974, there's a very high chance that the Zodiac started writing again. But as far as this one, I do have like a follow-up question, though, because if I'm drawing a blank, is the 1974 Donna Lass card actually mentioning the name Donna? Does it say Saint Donna on the card?
Yeah,
and Richard too.
it's handwritten. Best wishes, Saint Donna and Guardian of the Pines.
Okay, yes, and but by that time, though, the Donna Lass connection had been firmly established with the Zodiac and reported in the papers. And that's why I always go back to the Into Thin Air podcast that share their analysis like this. All right, firstly, Donna Lass goes missing. Firstly, we have people beginning to think about, well, I mean, what happened to Donna? Then there's the Pines card that is mailed, and then no specific information is tied to Donna Lass in the Pines card. So then people are almost making these mental connections. And by 1974, I think it was widely understood that there was a Zodiac killer theory involving Donna Lass. So a copycat could have fabricated that relatively easily. But that's my take.
Why do you think the person who sent that card waited till 1974? What do you think triggered that exact time to deliver that card to Mary Pilker?
I don't know. And I it's been a while since I looked into the card, so I'd have to go back and refresh myself with it. But I don't know if an article ran maybe around that time saying, hey, this Donna Lass case is still unsolved now after 3 or 4 years, and maybe they saw something in there. I have to go back and look to see if there were any articles that ran in the paper around the time this card was mailed.
There was an article mid 1974 about Mary Pilker, who got involved in a car crash. But I can't see any connection, because that was around June or July or somewhere around there. So I don't really think that's relevant. But that's the only mention I saw of Mary Pilker in 1974, which may have triggered a response from somebody. But that's 6 months in advance. So, but I did type Guardian of the Pines into the newspapers.com as well. And there is one entry, but again, it's a nursing home in Atlantic City. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
relevance is not there, is it? Where he might have got the inspiration for that card.
Well, I go
Yes,
back
but
to
go ahead,
the
Mark. Go ahead.
the fact that now Ned could be right. This could be a copycat that just said, "Hey, I know somebody previously sent a card that mentioned the Pines, and now I'm going to use Pines in my thing." But they'd have to do that after 3 years after and remember that specific mention of the Pines. So, you know, as people that study this case a lot, we remember things from one letter to the next and we know offhand the dates. But if somebody was just randomly sending a something to Donna's family in South Dakota, would they remember the Pines thing being used from so long ago? But 3 years before peeked through the Pines, and now they're using Guardian of the Pines. To me, it makes it seem like it could be the same person. And what I also find interesting is if somebody wanted her family to think that they were the Zodiac, why wouldn't they just put a threat in there? I killed Donna and now she's out in the Pines. This is almost like a tongue-in-cheek, like it looks like it's a well-meaning happy holidays type card. There's no threats in there, but it seems like something the Zodiac would do. He'd sort of rub their nose in it and say, here's a taunting, you might take it as it's just a Christmas card somebody sent, but it's really a dig at you because Donna's buried out here near these pine trees.
Did you know that Jibber Jabber sent me an article about Donna Lass, and it stated in there she attended church at St. Mary's in the Pines every Sunday. So there's your saint and there's your Pines.
And that's interesting. So, and back in the 70s, right now we have the internet, so we can find anything quickly. We can just start searching databases and searching newspapers.com and finding all kinds of wonderful things to try and connect. But back in the 70s, with somebody, either the real Zodiac, the real killer, somebody that's a copycat, what access would they have to all of this stuff to sort of combine them? And to me, it doesn't seem like it would be a lot. And I just go back to the fact that this person chose Guardian of the Pines 3 years after somebody claiming to be Zodiac mentioned the Pines. Do they just
Unless
have a
it was
really good
Zodiac.
memory? Yeah, and maybe they just like that phrase and it sounds creepy, and that's why they used it again. So to me, I think it's just less likely that some well-meaning person that wasn't involved would send them a card and use that phrase. To me, it's a taunt. It's taunting. Guardian of the Pines. It almost sounds taunting and mean, and it's meant to look like a Christmas card, a holiday card.
Yeah, it's sinister. But the Zodiac Killer, what I found, he was often sourcing articles and months, as I've just explained just a minute ago, months, if not years before, almost like he kept cuttings from maybe what crimes he did, or he worked with newspapers, or he was a hoarder of newspapers, because he seemed to find these things with an incredible consistency through his communications, where he's quoting things from weeks, months, and years before. So has he got any connection to the newspaper industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. And that sort of goes with what I was saying. What are the chances some random well-meaning person sent this card to Donna's family and happened to use Guardian of the Pines when somebody that's possibly the Zodiac sent peeked through the Pines? I think that's too much of a coincidence for my liking.
And to be very clear, I did not think that the Guardian of the Pines card in '74 was a well-meaning person. I was like, maybe somebody who did that as a taunt. But Morph brings up some very solid reasoning about how that could be the same type of person. But Richard did ask a question. Does the Zodiac killer's behavior suggest that he worked in the newspaper business? Maybe. But what I think is definitely more apparent is the Zodiac probably was either a hoarder or collector of newspapers. When you say a hoarder, it almost means like they're a little bit disorderly. I think he probably would have had newspapers, magazines, books, and he would have probably collected them somewhat neatly and would have been familiar with a lot of the stories in there. And I do think the Zodiac Killer would have been the type of person to recall very, very strong and clear details, a very vivid memory, maybe not the best at doing like all types of complicated, intelligent um, issues, but I do think that he would have collected all of those things just because there's so many different influences on the Zodiac's behavior from the previously mentioned magazines and comic books and newspapers. And I just think that that's all a big clue.
He can sift through microfiche at the library for old articles, but certainly for his cuttings, you know, he has to have the newspaper actually in his possession.
I just want to say one thing real fast. You guys are a lot older than I am. Even when I was growing up in the 90s, we regularly kept newspapers around, magazines. We had a whole wall of National Geographic and Scientific American magazines. It was totally normal to keep that stuff around before the internet.
Yeah, I thanks for calling us old, Ned.
I did
But
not
yeah,
mean that at all.
you are right though. You know, back in the day, newspaper delivery was very common, and you could get umpteen, depending on the city you lived in, how big it was, you could get lots of different newspapers delivered to you. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Zodiac was somebody that read a lot, especially trying to find stuff about them being in the newspaper. So I would predict that he subscribed to a lot of different newspapers and read a lot, and probably stored them and had some box where he kept clippings and stuff like that.
100%.
Have both of your positions shifted significantly since the discovery of her remains at the location they were found? Whether
Yes.
it's a Zodiac killer or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
As for me, I'm waiting to hear more. I want to hear more. I'm hoping the police come out with more details. And you know, that would be great to help me think a little bit more about what my next you know, thoughts will be.
Just quickly, what happened about that skull that was found a year or two ago? We haven't heard anything since, have we?
Not that I know of, and I haven't been following it closely, but it doesn't surprise me if it took this long to find Donna's DNA in one of those skulls. I just don't know why it took so long, especially because her family's DNA was on file. You know, there's some speculation online that they had to do genealogy to find out the skull was Donna's. That's not true. Once they got that DNA out of that skull, they had her families already. They can compare it 1-to-1 against it and say, this is either a family member or it's not. So once they did that, they didn't have to go through an entire genealogy process to try and figure out it was Donna's. They just compared it to her family's that was on file. Now, if this other skull doesn't have, if they had some different missing persons family members DNA to compare it against and it wasn't a match to any of them, then they might elect to do the genealogy route, and that's more time consuming, more costly, and takes a longer time. So something like that, you'll take longer. But my thinking is, because they have the success now with Donna's case in identifying her, I'd be shocked if they're not trying to identify every bit of remains they have in their possession of any remains they've ever recovered in their jurisdiction. Because whether they match it 1-to-1 with a family member who's supplied DNA or what they go genealogy, I think one way or another, they can identify a lot of these people and maybe not solve their case, but at least put a name to some of these remains.
Did you know there was a skull found on November 1972 at the Malakoff Diggings State Park, which is 15 miles west of where Donna Lass's remains were found?
I had collected a listing of some different remains from that area for a project I was working on. And, from the 70s to the 80s, I had sort of compiled a list of cases of people who were found dead or disappeared from the area or remains that were found, but I didn't go back and look at that since Donna's remains were found. So I don't remember if I had that on my list of remains that were found.
Yeah, there was
Right,
also
and much. Oh, sorry, but much like Morph, I'm still trying to digest all of this information because people were sending me like articles from the 1980s and such talking about the different human remains that were found in not exactly the vicinity of the Yuba Gap, but in that part of California, in that part of the country. And there are so many stories, and that almost made me think of the Gilgo Beach killer, Rex Heuermann, who's, well, I guess still awaiting trial, but just about how serial killers, are they using the same area as a dumping ground? Is this all the same person? Because that definitely got me thinking about how, is this just like a serial killer who's using this place to discard the bodies for disposal? Now, not enough information has been provided to support a theory like that. That is just purely a curiosity. But I mean, there are just so many stories of like human remains being found in that part of the country.
Yeah, Placer
Yeah.
County was popular for dumping ground of bodies. There was another body found, another skeleton found in Colfax by Iowa Hill Road, and that's within touching distance of Ponderosa Way, where we know that Judith Akari's body was found, and that was in 1972 as well.
And you know, it's not unusual for multiple killers to be in the same area. I mean, operating at the same time in the same area is sort of unique, but it's not unheard of. You know, there have been cases where there were thought to be more than one killers that just happened to be dumping bodies in the same general vicinity. You know, you can go to the Texas killing fields outside of Houston, and down along I-45, and from the 70s, 80s into I think into the 90s, there were lots of female victims and a couple of male victims too, who were killed, dumped, found, whatever you want to call it, in the same general vicinity, and they think there was more than one person doing it. It wasn't the same person. So I think there can be an overlap for sure. And that sort of segues into another question I wanted to ask you guys before we moved along too far. We mentioned Judith Akari. Like Donna, she was a nurse. You know, she was found sort of out in the middle of nowhere. So there are some similarities with that. They had a similar overall look. What are your thoughts, both of you, as to the possibility her case could be connected to Donna's?
Do you want to answer, Ned, first? Or
Certainly, I'll take this one because I think that there are a lot of similarities, and this is the type of stuff that always bothered me about the Zodiac case. When they look at someone who is sneaking up on people and firing gunshots, or tying up the victims and stabbing them and walking away, that is a different type of crime completely. But targeting a lone woman when it's dark out, both of them even have similar occupations, very, very strong similarities. And that does lead me to believe that there's a chance that this could be related, or at the very least, I would say this is a similar type of criminal behavior, whereas absolutely everything that the Zodiac did in his confirmed crimes was different. And I do want to throw in one side note about the remains that have been found. After I was reading through the stories of how there were these remains that were found in California and Nevada, one story I encountered was that of the lady in the fridge. In 1995, a woman's body was found in a refrigerator, and also her family was looking for her. And it wasn't until 2023 that she was identified as Amanda Diza. So sometimes it does take 28 years, 37 years for these identifications, and it just appears to be a slow process.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to when they employ the genealogy. So, you know, if you've had remains sitting up in your shelf or wherever you keep them, you know, a skull, whatever, if you've had them sitting up there since 1985, when you decide, hey, I'm going to do genealogy, I'm going to extract DNA from the skull and do genealogy, that part can be done quickly. It doesn't take years and years to do that. It's just a question of when they decide they're going to do it, and they put their mind to it, and they put the money in to do it, because the actual testing, the genealogy, all of that stuff can be done in pretty short order. So, you know, usually it's a lack of money. It's a lack of money, but now it's becoming more and more easier access to get that work done. More people are doing it, so it's bringing down the cost. And I think you're going to see more and more police agencies with unidentified remains. They're just going to be doing this on a more regular basis, and you're just going to see more and more of these John Does and Jane Does identified. But then the investigation still has to come in. Well, how did they get there? Who did it? What happened to them? But at least they'll have their names back.
In respect to Judith Akari, 6 days after she disappeared, there was a guy by Ponderosa Way who spotted 3 men with a vehicle in the location she was eventually found buried. And when he approached them, they shut the boot and sort of fobbed him off, saying they were bottle hunting or something like that. So there were 3 people there. I would suspect these are the 3 individuals partly responsible either for her killing or aiding in the killer to dispose of the body.
Didn't they have shovels? Or didn't one of them have a shovel? I thought I remember somebody.
I just know that they sort of shut down the boot. It's like they were taking her body in the boot to dispose of it. The fact that he reported this 6 days after she was abducted, was she kept for 6 days? Was she killed and then eventually dumped? But it seems rather a coincidence in such a remote area. I mean, it was near Weimar, Ponderosa Way. So to travel all the way out there and have this suspicious activity occur at the exact site her body was ultimately found suggests to me that these 3 lads had something to do with her disappearance and murder.
Yeah, that's always been an interesting thing. And then there was one more case I wanted to ask you guys about, and this has reignited my interest in this case, and that's Dr. Charles Hollingsworth. He was a doctor who lived in South Lake Tahoe, and his apartment was less than 1 mile from Donna's new apartment. And he went missing, within weeks of Donna going missing. So I've always wondered, could there be a connection? You've got the medical thing, you've got them being so close to each other. One thing we know is that Donna had an interest in flying or had been out with pilots. Dr. Hollingsworth owned a plane. So I can't prove they knew each other, but to me, if they did, if there's some kind of link between them and it was proven that they knew each other, I'd have a hard time saying their cases aren't connected somehow. What do you guys think about the Hollingsworth case?
Well, his surgery was only about 300 meters from the Lowe's.
Yeah, so he was close. His work was close to Donna's old house, and where he lived was very close to Donna's new apartment.
That's right.
So about this one, someone just asked me recently on Black Box Online Radio, are there any other suspicious deaths in the area surrounding Donna's disappearance? And I drew a name on the blank, and Richard filled me in, actually, so thank you for that about this story. And I think that it comes down to something that I once heard on True Crime Garage. When you have 2 events like this, as Morph said, in such close by locations, absolutely you have to think about a connection, even if it's, a man versus a woman, lone female being abducted versus the contrary. You have to think about a connection if these 2 events are happening as close by as they are. So there could be a very high chance that they are related if it does come to light.
And I mean,
sorry,
go ahead, Rich.
How do you factor in where his vehicle was found? I can't remember the exact location his vehicle was found. Maybe you know, but how do you factor that into the equation?
So I don't remember exactly. I don't have anything in front of me, so I'm just going by memory here. And from me visualizing it, I don't think it was found very close to where Donna's remains were found. But I'll have to get back and look at that just to see if I'm remembering that correctly.
No,
but I do know that, the only things I know for sure is that his apartment was so close to her new apartment. she was supposedly last seen with this blonde guy on Pioneer Trail, and that's where he lived. And so, I mean, that's how close it is. It could be totally, not connected. It could just be random. But one interesting thing in his case, there were reports that he was depressed. He had gone through a divorce. He wasn't doing good financially with his business. There was a run of problems. I interviewed his daughter for my podcast, Missing Persons. She had some really good insights into him. But the interesting thing that I took away from it, there was the theory that he had gone out into this area where his car was found and taken his own life. But was interesting was his gun was found inside his car, and he was not found. So you would think if he took his own life, he likely would have used that gun. So how's the gun in his car and found, but he's not found? So you can't take your own life with a gun, assuming that's how he would do it if he was going to take his own life, and the gun is found safely in the car. It just doesn't add up. So to me, that's always been a very perplexing part of that. Does he take his own life in such a way that his body's never found? And then how, unless he took his life in a different way, how is he, that gun found safely in the car and not with him someplace?
Wouldn't you expect his body to be found relatively close to his vehicle? You're not going to walk 5 miles away from your car to commit suicide.
Sure. That's what I would think.
And what you also made a connection to Santa Barbara, didn't you?
Yeah. So there was another guy named, I think his name was Richard Streel, and he disappeared. Now his was a little bit later in the 70s. It wasn't right after Donna went missing. It was later on. Just the interesting thing I found about him was that he had lived in Santa Barbara at the same time Donna had lived in Santa Barbara, and they were in very close proximity. So I just happened to catch that when I was doing research and see that they both lived in Santa Barbara at the same time. I have no idea if they knew each other, but I just, them living at the same time in Santa Barbara, so close to each other, I think it was within a mile. I just always found that interesting. And then, he goes missing in the same area as Donna. Could be totally unconnected, but it just was something that jumped out to me.
And I do have one thing to share about this, because you guys were talking about what would happen if the disappearance of Donna Lass took place today. And Morph brought up the point about how there would be so many more surveillance cameras in the casino. But as I previously mentioned, the story of Amanda Schumann-Diza, the lady in the fridge, I mean, I was just on Fox 40's website and they were interviewing the witness who found the body. And I think if Donna Lass went missing in 2023, people who knew her would be being interviewed, the clips would be shared on the internet, and we wouldn't just be guessing about these things. Well, was it this guy or that guy, or did someone actually see the sighting of the blonde man? Was somebody actually talking to her in Santa Barbara? Those people would be making clear and documented video evidence. This is what happened, and they're at least telling their story in a way that we can evaluate. I mean, people are always going to misremember details, but that would be just an enormous amount of clarity that we would have. But we don't have that from the early 1970s.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's so much easier to have a discussion online or jump on a forum. The case is new and fresh. There's like a web sleuth thread started immediately, or a Reddit thread started immediately, where people are just compiling information right from day one. Obviously, they didn't have that back in the 70s. So if a case like Donna's happened today, there'd be an immediate forum or Reddit post or web sleuth post talking about the case.
And today we have number plate recognition cameras, so you could track all the friends and family of Donna Lass, check your cameras, see where these vehicles went, and if they headed off into the Tahoe regions of nowhere, you could probably focus on these people, because you can track people now with their vehicle with the number recognition system. I don't know if it's the same in America, but they do that in the UK.
Yeah, there's a number of different surveillance cameras and traffic cameras, and even Ring doorbells. People, almost everybody has some kind of security home system, Donna's neighbors might have had one where they would have captured her if she made it home and was trying to get into her house and something happened. I mean, it's almost impossible today.
Yeah.
Plus, if it happened today, Donna probably would have had a cell phone. There'd be cell phone data. Where was her phone last pinging off of, that kind of stuff. So it's obviously it didn't happen today. It happened back in the 70s when there was none of this stuff. But I think there'd be a lot less mystery to it now. There'd be a lot more to investigate now if it happened today.
And you have bus
Oh
and car.
yes, and the technology is also improving. I remember from the Alec Murdoch murders that not only do they have like the locations of vehicles, the OnStar data in the car can also tell you when the doors are being opened and when they're being closed. And I think that it is somewhat saddening that this type of information is not there.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you guys want to shift gears a little bit and take some of these comments and theories and questions from the posters on ZodiacKiller.com?
Yes, but I do have one final question for
Yep.
both of you because I've been asked this a lot recently after Donna Lass's remains were identified. Is there any chance at all, and if so, what is the likelihood of Ted Bundy being the perpetrator?
I don't know enough about his movements. I mean, I know a couple. I know a very thorough Ted Bundy expert who I could reach out to right now and say, hey, on this date, where was Ted Bundy? And she could probably tell me. And maybe I'll do that actually after we do this, just to end any speculation on it. She would know what state he was living in and where he was going to school, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I think it's highly unlikely that it was him, but I could actually find out for sure where he was.
I just want to point out that was a wild fringe theory that people were sharing in 2021. But after Donna Lass's remains were identified in multiple places online, they're like, forget the Zodiac Killer. Let's look at Ted Bundy as the suspect. So that's why I had to ask you.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's just so many predators out there in California during that time. You could go to any county and find somebody that was up to no good. And, look how many cases the Zodiac is connected to. And we know he didn't kill all those different people in all those cases, but, it doesn't stop people from trying to connect him.
In mid 1970, Ted Bundy was at the University of Washington, and in 71 he was working in Seattle.
Yeah,
but that doesn't preclude
very unlikely.
It doesn't preclude anybody from traveling distances to commit a murder, but it makes it less likely.
So let's jump into some of these questions. So first one is from PC9900. And they say, Morph's interview last year with the daughter of Dr. Charles Hollingsworth, who went missing from South Tahoe several weeks after Lass, opened my mind to a greater possibility that Lass and Hollingsworth could have known each other. Can you summarize what is known about the possible links between the two people and their disappearances? Well, we just touched on that. They were both in the medical field. They both lived very close to each other. His business was close to each other. But beyond that, I don't think we have any solid connection that they knew each other or any proof of that. So we'll move on to the next one.
Quickly, Mike, quickly.
Yep.
Do you know Donna Lass's doctor?
I don't know that.
See, that'd be curious if it was Hollingsworth, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be suddenly interesting. And this is where the police could come in and say, hey, could these two cases be connected? And I don't recall what kind of doctor he was. I haven't looked at him in a while. So if he was like a plastic surgeon or something, I think he was a general doctor that did a little bit of everything, but I'm not remembering that clearly, so I don't want to say that for sure. But if he was like a specialized plastic surgeon or something like that, and Donna was having a plastic surgery, there's probably no chance he would be her doctor. But then again, if he's a general doctor and his business was close to where she used to live with the Lowe's, then maybe she might go to him as one of the closest doctors, and then all of a sudden that becomes a very interesting possible connection. So the next one is from our friend Druser. He says, I'd like to know more about the young security guard named Rasmussen that Mary mentioned. And the quote is, I feel someone at the casino definitely knows more than they have said. A young guard named Rasmussen came up on his own and asked if the lake was searched. So this is Drewzer's asking about Mary Pilker, Donna's sister, and this Rasmussen guy. What are your thoughts on that, guys?
Well, he wasn't in the private investigator's report, was he?
I don't recall that name being in there, but I should have had that report up and open right now, and I don't. So I do know there is a security guard mentioned there, and somebody else is going to ask about him coming up. So we'll get to him, but I don't remember Rasmussen specifically.
And I just want to point out that with the murder of Arliss Perry in '74, the perpetrator turned out to be Stephen Crawford, the security guard that found her body. And I think one of the reasons why I even mentioned maintenance man or security guard as possible occupations of Donna Lass's murderer is those would be people who would know the layout of a building like the Sahara Tahoe very well. And with security guards, they would also have access to the surveillance. They're going to know when people are watching and when people are not watching. And now, what do I think about somebody asking a question, did they search the lake? That just sounds like it could easily be innocent. That could easily be just curiosity, or somebody is just thinking about a likely burial place. And a lot of people on forums have talked about how they thought Donna Lass was well, buried at Lake Tahoe. I almost said buried at sea. That's not really fair, but they thought that she was put into the water. So that doesn't strike me as anything that could be incriminating at face value. But I mean, if it turns out to be a security guard, I won't be surprised at all.
I suspect that Drew's asking the question because sometimes the murderer will interject himself into a crime scene. So maybe that's why Drew's asking that question.
Entirely possible as well. Just different possibilities on the table.
Yeah, and I think it was, I think what it was really nagging was that it bothered Mary, if I understand correctly, something that stuck out in her mind. So she was suspicious of it, but maybe at the time she might have been suspicious of anybody, even somebody that was just well-meaning coming up to help. And, you know, that could have been that case there. So the next one is from Rocky 25. And he's asking a series of questions here. So I'm just going to run through them. Some of them we could probably skip through pretty quick because we talked about them. But was Donna kidnapped at her home or at her work? We've talked extensively about that. We don't really know. He points out her car was parked at her home. That is correct. Did Donna's home or car show any signs of a struggle?
No.
Based on what I've seen, no. Do you guys recall anything different?
I also say no. No, I don't recall any signs of a struggle. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb and just say what I think happened. I believe that Donna was abducted closer to the Sahara Tahoe than she was at her home. I don't believe she was abducted by her vehicle, but that's just my take on the subject.
There was no disturbance inside her flat, but they did notice that the light was still on. So I don't know if that has any meaning whatsoever.
Oh, was that the bathroom light or was it a closet light? It was.
I can't remember which light. I just know there was a light on inside her apartment. So
yeah,
is that suggestive of when she left? Often people leave the light on because it makes it look like there's somebody in. They don't want to get burgled. Or...
yeah. Or
my take on the subject.
If she is coming home at night and it's dark still, maybe she wants to go in a house that's got a little bit of light on inside and not a pitch black apartment either.
And I also thought that it was a light that was not like in the living room or the kitchen or something that she wouldn't have seen immediately. And then she was new to the apartment. My gut feeling was that she just forgot to turn that one off. I don't think it shows any sign of a disturbance.
Yeah,
but they also described a lack of fingerprints, didn't they, in the apartment and the car, which sounds strange because the only way you wouldn't find any fingerprints on a vehicle or inside the apartment is somebody wiped the thing down.
Yeah, and that was something that stuck out to me, and it could just be the way it's worded when they say no fingerprints. Maybe it's no fingerprints that were suspicious, but I mean, if they indeed found like 0 fingerprints in the apartment, that would be really strange if that was the case. Because just people that had lived there before, work guys coming in, cleaning up, Donna being there, you think there would be fingerprints there. So I have a feeling that was just the way they worded it, and it was a little confusing. Or and I don't have the report in front of me. Did it say they didn't try and get any fingerprints? I can't recall.
But we
Was it
know
no
that
finger?
we know that many people trawled through that apartment before Donna Lass was ever announced as having disappeared.
Mhm.
So you would expect some fingerprints there, but maybe they eliminated
Yeah.
certain people.
And I can't remember if that wording, and again, I don't have the report in front of me. I wish I had left it open, but I can't recall if it says they didn't check for fingerprints or they didn't find fingerprints, because there's a big difference.
I think the wording was fine, but
Okay.
I'd
Yeah.
have to, yeah.
We'll have to go back after we're done recording and just see what that is, because that's a big difference. If they didn't look for any fingerprints, or if they looked and didn't find any, that's a huge difference. All right. So next question from Rocky 25. Does Ted Bundy have an alibi? We talked about Ted Bundy already. Was Joseph Holt living in the Tahoe area in 1970? I don't think he moved there until the mid 70s, but
74.
somebody else posted that his family lived there at the time, and I don't know that. I can't confirm that, but I did read that. Do you guys know anything about that?
Yeah, he lived in he went to Lake Tahoe in 74. Before that, he was living in San Jose. So
Yeah, and
oh,
like I said, I
he was
did read that.
yeah, sorry.
So I was just gonna say, I did read that his parents lived there in 1970, but I don't know that. I can't confirm that.
No, again,
And
we can't eliminate him from being. I mean, if Zodiac Killer lived in the Bay Area, he had the capability to travel to Lake Tahoe. So can Joseph Holt.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and I also wanted to share that Joseph Holt was connected and identified as the murderer of Bryn Rainey, which took place in the late 1970s. And she was also somebody who would work like I believe she worked the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift at her occupation, and she would like to go to the bar before her job started. Same reasons as Donna, just done like in reverse order, just so she's not like out roaming about late at night. She wants to go to a place that was familiar. And I just wanted to point out that she's abducted in a relatively similar timeline. I mean, not identical, but this is someone who could have been paying attention. In the past, I thought he was a reasonable suspect. I guess I've just put him on the back burner for now, but always waiting to hear the results.
Yeah.
So Rocky's next question: was there another body found near the area where Donna's body was found? If so, has that person been identified yet? I think that's a little bit of a mystery on its own, because we don't know the precise location where it was found. We know a general location, but there's a little confusion as to which remains were Donna's, because there were a couple different sets of remains found, and there was some bouncing back and forth on the ZodiacKiller.com as to which one of those remains was Donna's.
The initial ones were noted as possibly being in August, which were the incorrect ones. I think this is where the error came, where they're saying they thought the body had only been deposited 3 years prior to its discovery, and I think that was a totally separate case to the one regarding December the 31st, 85, and early January 1986. So I think that's where a little bit of a cross wires came when the case was first mentioned. So
yeah. And then Rocky's final question: is the FBI involved in the investigation? I don't know that answer. Do either of you guys?
well, unless Lake Tahoe asked for FBI involvement, there's no reason for them to get involved, is there?
I have not heard
No,
anything about the FBI being involved.
I
No.
haven't either, and had they could certainly become involved if it was determined that she was abducted and taken across state lines. Then all of a sudden, then they could be involved. But obviously, she was abducted on this side of the border and found on this side of the border. So, I don't think they would have automatically become involved. But
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe they still will at some point. So Tommy T writes, is there a list somewhere as to who, John Doe or not, roughly where and dates as to when others were discovered? The only remains currently in the works to be ID'd. So are there remains currently in the works to be ID'd? So I think Tommy T is asking, and maybe one of you guys have talked about this or have maybe on your site, Rich, a list of different cases in that area and where they occurred and when the remains were found or where the people went missing. Sort of a central list of activity in that area, I think, is what Tommy T's asking.
Well, only the ones I mentioned earlier regarding Malakoff State Park and the Colfax, Iowa Hill Road, they were 72. In 86, there was also a human skull found in Sierra Meadows subdivision, which is near Mount Pluto. And there was also a human skull found near Truckee as well. So there are several skulls and human remains found in that area, 72 and 86 at the time when Donna Lass was discovered. So I suspect, I have read, like you, countless amounts of human remains in that area. So, and I don't think we can necessarily say it's one person responsible for all this. I just think it was a popular dumping ground at that point.
And
Yeah.
I want to
And
add that somebody asked me, like, were there other unsolved murders in Placer County, California? I got on Google and I started messing around, and I did find a list of unsolved homicides. And, you know, it's going back decades, and a lot of it's going to be stuff that people wouldn't think is connected to Donna Lass. But more or less, I would point toward Richard's site, Zodiac Ciphers, and what Richard has just shared about how there are these numerous cases of human remains that have been found. So it seems like we do have some type of documentation and organization for both the unsolved homicides and for the human remains that have been found.
Yeah, and I have a case of a list of cases from the 60s through the 80s of missing people, murdered people in that area, remains that were found in that area. I might eventually get around to condensing it and putting it someplace where people can see what I found. As a matter of fact, I may have actually posted some of them on someplace on zodiackiller.com recently, actually. Not very well organized, just a quick list of stuff in that area that I found. So I think that is actually on Tom's site in one of my recent posts. People can go check that out. But it would be fascinating to have a organized list of cases from a, you know, say a 50 square mile area, and then you could go through and look at the similarities and the differences between the cases.
I think there's a fair to credible argument that the murderer of Donna Lass probably murdered before or after that crime. I doubt this was a one-time murder.
Yeah. So Scary Gary has a couple questions. Was Donna really last seen walking with a blonde man? We talked about that. I think we don't know if that's accurate, and we don't know if so what the date was. So I think we touched on that.
We don't know, but I did vote that I don't believe that story. I think that story
Okay.
is untrue.
Yeah. I don't know enough about the witness, and I'd rather see a police report than this private eye report because it's not well detailed, but I'd like to know more about that before I came to a conclusion on it, you know, maybe from a police report. Does the Pines card look more or less like a clue from the killer now that we know her remains were discovered? I think Rich touched on that. I think we're all in agreement that it's opened our minds to it definitely being a possibility, right?
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And then his last question is, what's the typical range animals scatter remains? I don't know this. I've actually watched a couple of videos where they talk about this kind of stuff, and animals do scatter remains a pretty good distance. And it depends. Are they, you know, if the remains are uphill, gravity takes care of a lot of stuff rolling downhill. That kind of thing. Is it near water and they can get washed away and wind up in a different spot? So I don't know that there's a clear answer, but typically most remains, if they're scattered, they're not scattered miles apart. They're within, you know, a walking distance usually, but depending on the terrain, the conditions, as far as I know, they can be a little bit spread out, but not drastically. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, animals can scent a body from miles away, so it's quite possible they've discovered the remains and moved it several miles. That's perfectly possible, but it would still place the remains roughly in that area. I doubt we're looking at her remains being moved 10 or 20 miles, but certainly within a few miles, I think it's perfectly plausible.
Yeah,
I do
and
as well. I'm not an animal behavior expert or anything, but just from watching enough things on the Nature Channel, as Richard said, several miles I think is possible. 10 or 20 miles is getting into unlikely.
yeah, and also we have to remember too, a lot of those smaller bones are not going to remain, especially if Donna was originally buried. Maybe she's buried in a shallow grave and part of her was dug up. They could still be partially buried someplace. So a lot of the smaller bones are eaten, and typically it's big bones, skulls, femur bones, big bones that are hard to break down that are usually found of someone, not smaller bones. So I think we also have to remember that as well.
Can I ask a quick question to both of you?
Yep.
Why did it take 37 years, considering they found her jawbone with all the teeth intact? Surely she had dental records and that could have easily been compared.
That was one of my first questions. How do you not, you shouldn't even have to go the DNA route because they should have had dental records. And they should have made that identification much earlier than they did. I don't understand that.
Now, wait a second, though. I remember reading from one of the 1986 articles that they were talking about how they found first a part of the jawbone, then they found the skull, and then they were comparing the dental records to people who had gone missing in the area, and they've had no matches. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? You're going to confine your search to a radius that would be that small? Could it not be somebody from State Line, Nevada? They're not even going to examine, especially someone who was involved in a high-profile missing persons case in the early 1970s. I'm not sure why it took 37 years. It's quite shocking.
And,
Yeah.
and in a 2000 newspaper article, they said they took DNA from her relatives to compare to anything found. So I'm surprised that I'm sure DNA had come on enough by at least 2000 to have tested that skull or the teeth to get the DNA long before 2023.
Absolutely.
100%.
That's why I think we're all in agreement. We don't understand what took so long to identify those remains as Donna's. And maybe the police will clarify that. Hopefully they do. But that's one of the things when you're talking about a case like this early and you don't have all the final details, you sort of have to wonder. Craigle asked one other security guard he wanted to touch on was George Victor Jonathan. What do you guys think of him?
Is he the drinker?
He's the boozer.
Yeah. Well, speculating on a guy I don't know, who I've never met, who just worked at the place where she went missing, it's impossible to say. Like you said in a previous podcast we did, just because he's a drinker doesn't mean he's a killer. So I can't really infer anything about this individual.
What are your
And
thoughts?
I also don't know enough. I don't know enough about him to share any solid information other than what I said previously about security guards. And I wouldn't be surprised if one was involved because of their ability to do so. But him specifically, I can't comment.
Yeah.
I've tried. Sorry, quickly. I've tried looking him up on the internet. Like I've done with many of these cases, and I can't find anything about him.
So I do know about him. I looked at him quite extensively. He wound up in the Houston area, interestingly enough, for some of those I-45 killings were. What I thought was interesting, there was a murder of multiple people at a place called in League City, which is outside of Houston, and that's where this guy wound up living. And in the case, there was a letter sent, and you can look this up, League City murders letter. And if you look at it, it's sort of like the Zodiac Donna Lass thing. You can turn it upside down like a playing card and look at it from the top and the bottom. So I always thought that was interesting that this guy wound up there in that area, and there was a letter that was like the Donna Lass case from there. But that is the only thing I could find. I don't know that he had a criminal record of any kind. The private investigators report, all it mentions was that he was a drinker. There's no mention of him threatening Donna or anything like that. So I don't really know how they Kane have any suspicion of this guy. What is interesting is Joanne, when I talked to her, was very specific that she could not find anybody to even talk to Donna about Donna to her at the casino. She had a hard time getting any answers. Where might Donna be? That kind of thing. She also said she was tired, so she wound up getting out of there after not finding Donna. But in the private investigator's report, it claims that she sat down with George Victor Jonathan for hours and had like a long conversation in which he danced around anything to do with Donna. And Joanne just said that was flat out untrue. She never sat down with anybody because she couldn't get anybody to talk about Donna.
Okay, Mike, can I share something about that? That is one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I've had some doubts about this Lawrence Kane story, that Lawrence Kane personally knew Donna, that he was working there in the real estate office and he would go over there and like try to flirt with her and she'd shut him down and be like, I don't want to talk to you. That's why I've had some doubts, because where is the paper trail supporting that? Where is any of the other hard evidence that are supporting these stories?
Well, there isn't. There's
Yeah.
just Harvey Hines claims, isn't there?
Yeah.
Well, yes, and also now from Sandy Betts, where she said that she talked to people who knew Donna and said that Lawrence Kane knew her personally and he would go over and talk to her. But when we look at what Morph just said, all of that stuff that should be more accurate is saying nothing about any type of relationship with Donna and Lawrence Kane, or that they even knew each other or crossed paths at all.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a record, a document saying he was employed there at that time, the same time Donna was there, or if there was a firsthand police report with a witness statement saying, yes, I went over to Donna's and Lawrence Kane was hanging out with her on her couch. I mean, those would be solid things. But right now, all we have is hearsay, secondhand information that we don't know if it's true. We can't verify it.
Yeah, what you said earlier about Jonathan moving to the Houston, and a letter was sent. Have you got that letter still?
I'd have to look for it. Like I said, I think it's online. I think if you Google League City Murders letter, you'll probably find it easily. But if not, I'll look for it and see if I have a copy of it still. I can send it to you.
Yeah, if certainly if crimes in Houston were similar MO or followed the same procedure, that would be interesting, certainly.
Yeah. And I should point out I don't know the exact years he lived there. I just know he lived there. He died. I don't know. I don't remember how long ago he died, but he did die there. And some of these murders and stuff in that area had happened, I think, before he moved there. So I'm not accusing him of being involved. It was something that I noticed when I saw this letter. It reminded me of the Donna Lass card and the way it was designed, that you could turn it upside down and see it from either angle, like a playing card. But yeah, I'll certainly look for that and send it over to you if I still have it.
I do have a question for you, and that relates
Mm.
more to the story that has been shared from Joanne Getchy. Firstly, I absolutely thank her for coming on the show and talking to you about Donna Lass. I thought that was just, an amazing thing to do. But I noticed during your interview with Joanne Getchy that she was also sharing some contradictory information to the official narrative. Now, don't quote me on this. It's been a long time since I've heard that interview, but I think she said that Donna Lass was working either 4 to 11 or 3 to 11, like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and that's what her expectation was. But there's definitely a different shift that she was attributing to Donna. So this whole thing about how she had an extensive conversation with somebody about Donna, I mean, it's been 50 years when you interviewed her. 50 years had passed. Do you think it's possible that she forgot or misremembered some things?
I think it's certainly possible. And I don't blame her for that. I mean, if you asked me to do something I was doing 2 years ago and asked me for details, I probably couldn't remember it. So 50 years, I totally understand that. I think the one thing she clearly indicated was that she went there expecting to meet Donna there. Donna wasn't there. And, you know, I'm thinking this is on the 7th. This is hours after Donna was last known to be in the nurse's station, almost 24 hours later. She's to meet Donna there after driving up there, and Donna never showed. Um, So I'm thinking this is, and maybe that's where she's getting 11 from. Maybe she was supposed to meet Donna at 11 p.m. there in the nurse's station, and she just is misremembering, thinking, okay, Donna was getting off at 11. I don't know that. But the general consensus is that she was supposed to meet Donna there at night. Donna never showed, and she got tired of waiting around and not getting any help from any of the casino. She finally went and got a hotel, which again, totally at odds with what's in that investigator's report. It says she sat there for hours talking to people, and she said that wasn't the case at all. She, I think that she would clearly remember about that
I do
day.
too.
Yeah.
I do too. I would expect even after 50 years, like if you go to meet your friend goes missing and it becomes a high profile missing person, and you were walking around trying to find people to talk to, you would remember, right? If you talk to somebody for 2 hours, for five
Yeah.
minutes, maybe not, for 10 minutes, maybe not, 2 hours, and this is one of the only people that's talking to you. And I don't mean to derail or anything, but Morph, why do you think there are all of these contradictory stories in that investigator's report?
I don't know. I don't know if it's, again, poorly written report. Not all the details are in there. They're in there incorrectly. The report itself leaves a lot to be desired. But I've read a lot of police reports where they're not written well. They're confusing. I mean, you can go right back to the James Owen account at you know, of his Lake Herman Road experience. I mean, for years, even Graysmith, it was so poorly written that it seemed like he was going or coming from work that night when he stopped, and in reality he was going to work. So even in Graysmith's book, he's got that backwards because the report was written poorly. But you basically, the details that are documented in that police report just aren't very thorough, and they're not very clear. And I wonder if maybe a police report would be clearer, written better. But at the same time, I think it is possible that Joanne is misremembering maybe a time or something like that, or maybe if she had a conversation with someone, she might not remember what they talked about per se, but she probably remember having a 2-hour conversation with somebody. Instead, she remembers the opposite, being frustrated nobody would talk to her, and then she decided to leave. So a little bit of left to be desired as far as details there.
Yeah, and in the conversation with you, Mike, she said she left San Francisco at 4 p.m. So she would have arrived at 8 p.m., about 18 hours after Donna Lass was presumed to have gone missing. So it wasn't the same night, is it? It's virtually 24 hours, as you just stated, afterwards.
Yeah, so I think, and we don't know, this is where it would help to have precise things. We don't know if Donna was supposed to work that night, and she was in Joanne was just going to hang out at the casino and wait for her to get off. But we know she was supposed to meet her that night. So whether that meant Donna was off and she was just going to come into the casino and say, "Here I am, let's go hang out," or if she was supposed to work that next evening and didn't, one way or another, she wasn't there, and Joanne was disappointed about that. Okay, so next we have Slowcone, and hello, if it's something you could discuss without too much research. There are a number of murders and disappearances in the area. If this wasn't the work of the Zodiac, could it be some other unidentified killer? How many serial killers were there? I think we touched on that. There were at least that the Holt guy was one serious predator that was responsible for multiple victims, but there could have been a couple more easily during that time, and it was a good area to dump bodies and not have them be found.
Is that a question?
That's just my response to his question. And do you guys have any different opinion on that?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about Joseph Holt and the possibility.
There was the kidnapper of J.C. Dugard, wasn't there? Garrido, was it?
Oh, Garrido. Yeah, there's Garrido. And for some reason, people thought that he could be a suspect in Donna's case. I don't believe that at all myself.
No.
I think Garrido took in a young girl, and I don't think Donna was fit his victim profile, but that's a theory that's been out there. So then we have one final question. This is from Gorilla Train. I want to know if Mary had any people whom she suspected over the years. I also want to know if any of the people in Donna's new neighborhood ever fell under suspicion. What do you guys think about those two questions?
I'll let Ned go first then.
Well, as you stated, there was the comment about this individual named Rasmussen that bothered Mary, correct? And so that would be meaning that she at least had some type of either suspicion or uncomfortable feeling. And I would expect that there would be a lot of gossip, insinuation, rumors. People are going to have their suspicions. But when I was reading up on Donna Lass's case, I really found that a lot of the people that are in her life aren't reported as being suspects, or they're not talked about as being under suspicion, whether it's where she lived or where she worked. Now, Donna Lass had at least one guy that she was dating regularly, maybe even more than one. I don't fault her for anything. They get talked about. I don't know their names unless Morph has uncovered them about the guy she had been dating or the other guy, if he existed at all. Just that Donna Lass was known to date guys. Yes, people have those types of theories because what they're simply saying is it was the boyfriend. I mean, some type of domestic dispute. Of course, he is going to be under suspicion, and rightly so, because a lot of the times it is that person.
Yeah, and hope. Go ahead, Rich.
So I think the only person that is under any suspicion at the moment is probably the Zodiac Killer, or somebody designing that Pines card to put the blame onto the Zodiac Killer, which would be an easy route for somebody to take back in those days. There were probably many people that offset their murders with the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, and he says, I want to know if Mary had any people she suspected over the years. Well,
yeah,
we talked about that. Ned talked about that. I'm suspicious of the person that mailed that Christmas card to her. To me, seems like that's a high likelihood that could be from the killer or from the Zodiac. Even if he didn't kill Donna, I could see him going out of his way to do that to taunt Donna's family. So I'm hoping they test that letter for DNA, along with every other possible confirmed or unconfirmed Zodiac letter over the years. I hope they test them all for DNA and try and do genealogy on them. But I'd like to know who sent that card to Donna's family.
But Morph, did you ever find the name of the guy that Donna had been dating?
I
don't recall doing that now.
There's a report in the investigator's report about somebody who was quite friendly with her, wasn't there? I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't remember if it names his last name either. I can't remember that, but I would hope that everybody they could identify that knew Donna, that was dating her or had any kind of romantic interest in her, I hope they would have questioned them properly.
But
right, because as Richard just said, though, she's described as being relatively friendly and outgoing, and that like she was talkative with people. So even if she weren't dating them, as Richard just said, it's likely that she was probably somewhat chatty with lots of people at the Sahara Tahoe.
And maybe that person could have interpreted her friendliness as being romantically interested in them, and she could have shot them down, and that could have angered them, and that could have led to what happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Harvey Hines worked closely with Don and Mary Pilker, and his suspect was obviously Lawrence Kane. So I'm wondering whether those two were convinced to his way of thinking.
Well, that's what worries me. I'm worried that any thinking she had, he steered her in that direction, or he steered the investigation in that direction to go towards his suspect. So is it a real neutral investigation? Or Mary's feelings, were they swayed at all by him and his suspect? I wonder.
A bit like Pam Huckabee.
Yeah,
well,
depending on who she's talking to and when she's talking to him, her opinion has changed.
I do have something to ask you guys, and this relates to Harvey Hines. If you go on ZodiacKiller.com, maybe the post is even still up on the Donna Lass page that was definitely up there in 2021, the first source that I read for my series. Their final line was talking about how in the 1990s, it was revealed that an investigator or detective had admitted to fabricating the Pines card. And it was way too long before I actually got around to asking Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com, what is the story behind that sentence that an investigator or detective admitted to fabricating the Pines card? And what he shared with me was that Harvey Hines told him that Dave Toschi admitted to Harvey Hines that Dave Toschi was the person who created the Pines card as a fabrication. Now, Tom Voigt also wanted to provide the condition that he didn't believe the story then, and he doesn't believe it now. And to ask both of you guys, do you think that there's any credibility to that? Do you think there's any likelihood that Dave Toschi fabricated the Pines card?
I can answer that easily, Ned. Harvey Hines did create a Pines card, and you can find it on my Lake Tahoe page. He took the original card and put a new paste up on it with the words put on top to fit into his theory that Donna Lass would be found near a ski resort, not too far from Claire Tappan Lodge. So Harvey Hines did create a Pines card that he willfully admitted to in his report, 150-page report. So there was never any a claim of anybody forging a Pines card. He willfully created an alternative Pines card to show his theory, and it's available on my site. So that information on Tom Voigt's site has been misinterpreted.
But you don't believe that that conversation happened at all, because Tom Voigt didn't state that it was in the report. He said that Harvey Hines told him, Dave Toschi confessed to me that he fabricated that card. That would be talking about something different.
I think obviously at some point Dave Toschi has heard that Harvey Hines has created an alternative card, and it's been misinterpreted down the line through secondhand information. But there was never any forgery. It was he willfully admitted he created a second Pines card, and the image is on my site. So
yeah, and that's the problem with second and third hand information. I heard it from so and so who heard it from so and so, and by the time that happens, who knows what the truth is. That's why I prefer to, I've heard so many things. Well, the police told me this, or I saw it with my own eyes. I no disrespect to anybody, but unless I see it in black and white, I don't believe it. Or unless it's a truly trusted source that I know personally, I don't believe something unless I can see it with my own eyes. So when I hear a lot of this scuttlebutt in Zodiac circles where something supposedly was said, or there's something that hasn't been proven, documented, I don't buy it. I just don't believe it until I see it, or unless I have a firsthand source that I trust very very well. I'm just not going to buy it.
And both of you guys have provided pretty good explanations. But I just want to point out, Dave Toschi has been accused of fabricating other Zodiac letters, but those all came much later. And I think Richard provided a solid explanation, as he thought how that story could have been either misconstrued or misinterpreted. Maybe those are fair words.
Yeah. And wasn't there, and refresh my memory, I know Rich is going to remember this offhand, but wasn't there the possibility or the thought or, the theory that there was blood on the card that was, or, someone said it could have been paint? What do you remember about that?
You on about the 13-hole postcard?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just thin, sort of a thin paper, wasn't it? That was believed to be drawn in blood. That crucifix. So you want about that?
Yeah, the one mailing in this case that I was thinking of was that, and if it had really been blood, then they might be able to pull DNA from it and determine whose blood that is. But I was sort of the opinion that it wasn't really blood in the first place. But
no, the FBI report states it's thin paper.
Okay, yeah. So just another thing that we just can be a red herring. Exactly. And so my final thought is I'd like to know, obviously I wish I had access to the Donna Lass police reports, and to the police out there. If you're listening to me, you want to send me a copy, I'll be happy to skim through your reports for you. I don't think they're going to do that, but I'd love to know what's in those Donna Lass police reports firsthand. I'd like to see who they question, what they found, what determinations they actually verified, what things are still unverified. I'd like to see with my own eyes, and not rely on secondhand speculation, poorly written private investigators reports, things like that. Or at the very least, I'm hoping the police will come out at some point and clarify things about Donna's case, saying, we know she left the casino safely. We know, her car got back to her, apartment, and, she drove that night. I mean, if they could answer any questions at all, it would just help us, eliminate some parts of the theory in this case.
Well, the Sahara Tahoe police pages that describe the disappearance of Donna Lass seem to have no extra information than we do.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem like the police are willing to share anything outside of what's publicly out there already, at least to this point. But that's helped fuel all the speculation and the theories and the hearsay and the incorrect things that are out there, because there isn't a correct list of bullet points out there to say, okay, here's what the police actually know. There's none of that really out there.
Do you think the discovery of her remains opens up the possibility that they will release some police reports now, or are you highly skeptical?
I'm skeptical. I really think at this point they'll give the old, it's an unsolved murder investigation and we can't comment on it. And even though it's been 50 plus years now, and the likelihood someone that did it is alive, well, I mean, they could be alive. I mean, people are living into their 80s and 90s now, and if that person was, say, 20 years old at the time, they could be in their early 70s. So I mean, I get why they would still want to try and solve the case. But a skull that's been out there for decades, well, it was out there at the time for 16 years or so, is there going to be any evidence to be taken off of it? Are they going to have DNA from her killer, unless they found something else along with the remains that was property of the killers? I don't see how they could physically solve the case, or maybe they have suspects that they haven't talked about. Maybe they identified people that were seen with Donna specifically right before she went missing that they're interested in. That's the things we don't know.
Can I ask you and Ned a question? We presume that Donna Lass went missing from the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. Do you think she was driven straight to the site where her remains were found and murdered there? Or do you think the killer took her home or to somewhere secluded and that was just a dump site?
I'll let Ned go first on this.
I think that that's quite possible, because there are different types of murderers out there, different types of serial killers. Some serial killers are just going to kill the victim rather quickly, and they're going to bring the victim to what more or less the dump site, and they're going to be just murdered there. And they are people who are killing for a different reason. Then there are the sexual predators who are going to hold somebody captive for a while. And when Morph posted back in 2021 about how he thought that it was likely that Donna Lass knew her abductor for the reasons that he has stated, and that somebody made the phone call because they were trying to get their story straight, or maybe to destroy evidence, that made me think a lot about how she was brought to a different location, maybe even somebody's home, held there, maybe even sexually assaulted there, and then her body was transported to the dump site. And I think both of them are reasonable possibilities, because if they can identify the cause of death, or they identify more skeletal remains, or could just share anything else about what happened to Donna, we could say something about that. But both of these situations are very, very common among serial killers. And I mean, one thing that doesn't seem super common is the behavior of the Zodiac killer. He does not seem like the serial killer that would have targeted Donna Lass, even though there's a higher chance in my mind that he committed this crime. But I wish we knew more. Over to you, Morph.
Yeah, I think, I'm sort of up in the air. If you would just re-ask me that question again. I want to give it some more thought, Rich.
What I'm thinking is, if the killer abducted her from the casino and drove her to the area where her remains were found, he would have had to have taken her there at at 3:30 in the morning and killed her there, which seems a bit curious. Or did he take her to his home, do whatever he was going to do, kill her and transport her to that site?
Yeah, I think that's where it really comes into play, whether Donna knew the person that did this to her, because she may have gone back to their home willingly, and something happened there, got out of hand. Maybe he'd never meant to abduct her and kill her, but something happened. He panicked and then said, "I've got to get rid of her body." Or, if it's a predator that is a stranger, maybe they just said, "I'm going to abduct the first woman I see, and I'm going to take her out to an area where nobody's going to be at, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do there, and then I'm going to kill her and leave her body there." To me, they're two likely different scenarios that either one could have happened. But if it's the case where Donna knew somebody and she went back to their home, let's say willingly, and something happened there, to me that it leaves a little bit more room for hope, because there could be a crime scene still that could be uncovered. People try and clean stuff up and hide stuff, but there could still be evidence of a crime scene, blood that seeped through, floorboards, things like that can still be found after all this time. And maybe if there's a suspect list or people that knew Donna, and police look at the places they lived back then, maybe they'll find evidence of the crime. Maybe they'll find a belonging of Donna's in that person's home that they shouldn't have. For example, her keys, her purse, something, her driver's license. Maybe he kept something. So maybe if they can find somebody who's a good suspect, they can search for any kind of links to Donna.
And maybe point to a Lake Tahoe resident with history.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. So the one thing we don't know, who were the sex offenders in the area? Were there anybody in Donna's new apartment building that had a record of crimes, abductions or sexual assaults? We don't really know who was in that area. I mean, today, if I wanted to look in that area, I could just look on the sex offense registry and tell you exactly who's there. But back then, I don't know how readily available that was. But anybody in that area with crimes against women, hopefully would have been looked at. And I don't know how easily that would be to find now, going back to look back then to see who lived there that was a stalker. But we have the luxury nowadays of finding things with the internet easily that we couldn't back then. For example, I found out the guy who lived in Sherry Jo Bates's house before her wound up becoming a sexual predator, and it was incarcerated. So I always thought that was interesting. I always wondered, did he somehow know her? And I actually passed that.
Just to jump in, yeah. We could do 3 hours on that question alone. I mean, that's amazing. I've not heard that before, but yes, please continue.
It's been so long, I don't remember the guy's name, and I could probably find it easily enough if I look it back up. But he went on to be and I forget what the term was, sexually dangerous criminal rapist, or I don't remember what the exact term was that they used, but it was the guy who lived in Sherry's house before she bought it. So I thought that was interesting, but I could maybe pass it along to you. But it just shows that you can find a lot of stuff today. If, again, putting the cart before the horse, if Donna's case happened today and we wanted to sit around and sleuth it as a group, we'd have a lot more at our fingertips to do that with.
And remember, Richard John Davis lived in the same apartment as Nancy Benelak. So your thoughts of the killer living close to Donna Lass in that apartment complex is a perfectly viable option. But I'm sure they've probably checked all those people. But it doesn't mean that person still couldn't have been her killer.
Well, exactly. And Richard Allen Davis is a good point, because they did look at everybody in her apartment building and somehow he slipped through the cracks. So, and then we also
interviewed
can't
him,
forget.
Right? Like he was like heavily put under the microscope, and they was like, it's not the guy, right? They just let him go, or no evidence or something.
Yeah, I think he had a roommate they talked to. Yeah,
which is ridiculous, isn't it? Really, when you think about
it. Yeah, and then also we have to remember Donna had lived in a different area of South Tahoe for the majority of the time she was there. So could the person be somebody back in that other area where she lived? Maybe a neighbor there. some people have been suspicious of Larry Lowe. I don't know his background enough to really make any comment on that, but if we can't just look at the apartment area where she just moved to, we have to also consider the time before that when she was in South Lake Tahoe. Then again, we also have to consider, could this be somebody further back in her San Francisco time that was stalking her and came out there and was interested?
Like Zodiac saying sought victim 12 when she was in San Francisco.
Yeah. I mean, so who knows? There's any number of different variables, but I think right now what we've got to do is probably wrap up, and I want to hear final thoughts from both of you on the developments and where you think things go from here.
Well, what I would say is this is probably, even though we don't know she's connected to the Zodiac Killer, this is probably the biggest break or occurrence in the case since the 340 was solved. And I never expected it. But what it's done now is confused me more than ever on whether the Zodiac Killer was responsible for her murder, which I had totally dismissed before. But now it's got me thinking twice.
What it answered a couple questions and then presented a million more, unfortunately. What do you think, Ned?
I think that this shows us that the Zodiac Killer mystery is solvable for a long time, especially in 2020. I mean, I was, doing episodes about the Zodiac on Black Box Online Radio, but I'm like, no, wait a second. Is this something where we're never going to get answers to? But it shows us that it is solvable because, as Richard said, we have seen the solving of the 340 cipher. The next year, the revelation that the Bates had to die letters were a hoax. In 2023, they identified Donna Lass's remains. 2024 might hold something very big. And I also want to say rest in peace to Donna. It is very difficult to formulate theories about what happened to Donna Lass because with a lot of the other unconfirmed Zodiac crimes, we know so much about how the victim was murdered. We know about the steps that the perpetrators might have taken, the steps that the victims might have taken. We know where the crimes took place. We know the type of weapons that were used. But with Donna Lass, almost nothing has been known. And a lot of people have heard us talk tonight or during the daytime, whenever you're listening, about how this is a plausible idea and that's a plausible idea, because I'm hoping that the authorities will release more information that will actually give us the opportunity to answer some of these questions. But it is definitely a big breakthrough in the case, and rest in peace to Donna Lass.
Yeah, I have. Go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say, and sadly, I believe that Mary Pilker died recently, didn't she?
Yeah, not too long ago, and
so she never got to see this news by a matter of years. So that's a shame.
I am happy for Donna's family, just to have, because I was of the opinion she was never going to be found. I thought wherever she was, she was buried and would never be found. But it just goes to show you that crimes can be solved, or at least people can be identified from long ago, and solve part of the mystery. At least they know where Donna wound up. It doesn't answer who did it and how and why, but it's a starting point. So if this can happen after 50 years, it gives me hope for the rest of the Zodiac case that there's other things that can be, pieces of the mystery solved, answers, questions answered. I still think the best hope for solving this case, I don't think somebody's going to find a confession letter after so-and-so dies. I don't think they're going to find a box after their grandpa passes away with a bunch of mementos in it and Zodiac letters. I think what it's going to take is hard physical evidence, DNA. I think DNA is what's ultimately going to have to solve this case, and it's the best source of DNA is shell casings that the Zodiac handled, bindings that we know he handled, things that can connect him to his DNA, the letters, the envelopes. There's been a whole back and forth about what they have, what they don't have with those letters, but I think they should be testing any and all confirmed or unconfirmed Zodiac evidence, whether it be letters and whether they think they're hoax letters or not. Identify whose DNA is on them if you can, and then make a list and then start going down one at a time, those names that you get on that list, and see if any of them could be potentially Zodiac. Because I think at this point, that's what it's going to take to solve this case is hard evidence.
And check the clothing of the victims from Lake Berryessa for any blood exchange from the killer to the victims, because often you cut yourself in knife crimes, just like the Sherry Joe Bates attack.
Absolutely. And, if they tested something 5-10 years ago, use the newest technology to test some things, because things that were done 5 or 10 years ago, the advancements right now with specifically DNA, they're so much better now. They can do things with less DNA, degraded DNA. They can get DNA profiles from a hair, from a single hair, a rootless hair. So if that's the case, and they have hairs that were recovered, test them, test all the evidence. Now, and I've said this time and again, I think California is so under siege with current crime that the Zodiac is sort of at the bottom of the pile. They're trying to solve and stay on top of everything happening fresh, and I can't fault them for that. But when you're limited on the resources, money, time, and you've got a bunch of crimes going on currently, cases like this sort of go to the bottom of the pile. But I hope somebody somewhere is still working on it, and that's the best case to solve this case long term.
And one last thing, don't forget we've got that hair behind the stamp on the Stein letter.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that, and I'm sure, I would think they have other hairs in this case that have been pulled off victims found at crime scenes, whatever. So I guess that there's multiple things that can be tested for physical evidence that still haven't, or maybe they haven't been tested recently, but they're worth testing, because I think that's what's going to take to solve this case. So I just one more time, can you guys plug where people can find you, what you're doing and what you're working on, and what people can expect from both of you?
You go,
All right,
Ned.
Richard, you can go first.
Oh, well, they know you can visit zodiacciphers.com to find me, or they can visit our Zodiac Speaking podcast series between me and you, Mike. That's my main two sites.
And will you be
I'm the host.
let me just ask Rich follow-up real quick. Will you be doing any new Donna Lass stuff, anything now that you're going to be working on as a result of these new developments?
Well, I've done 6 articles on it so far. So I'm still looking every day now. So there might be one or two more. But I'm digging through newspapers.com now for some more information. But I'm just looking for general phrases that might connect to this case, or where he may have got his inspiration from, if it was the Zodiac Killer. But yeah, I'll probably do a couple more maybe, but we'll see.
Awesome. And how about you, Ned?
And my name is Ned DeHaan. I run the YouTube channel Black Box Old Time Radio. I also release short episodes on my personal Facebook, Ned DeHaan, and on my Instagram page, BlackBoxNed88. And I'm going to do a limited edition podcast called The Zodiac and True Crime Talk on buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. In their post section, the podcast zone, 100% for free. Anyone can listen to that. As I said, limited edition, short edition, but that will be coming out soon. And every Monday on Black Box Online Radio, I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer called Zodiac Monday.
And can
Awesome.
I just add in that recently I interviewed Ned for the Zodiac Killer channel, Interviews with the Expert series. So Ned should be appearing on that shortly.
Awesome. So that's a little bit of a reverse from normal. Normally it's Ned doing the interviewing.
Yeah.
Yes. We wanted to do a bonus episode where we would have a previous guest on the program interviewing the host. I'm normally the host of the Interviews with the Expert series, and I'm always willing to do more for that program as well.
Awesome. Well, this was really fun, and it's refreshing, because I think all three of us, there's certain things we agree on, certain things we don't agree on, but it shows that we can all have a civil discussion and discuss the details and have a good lengthy conversation and keep things positive. So it's really great to have both of you on, and anytime you guys want to do this again, I'm game.
When do you intend to release it, Mike?
This will be airing on Saturday, January 6th. So hot off the presses. When people are going to be listening to this, it'll be literally within 24 hours of us recording it. Yeah, thank you both for coming on, and
Thanks a lot.
Rich, it's been a while since we've done an episode, so it was
I
good to
know.
have you back on.
Yeah, it's been good fun again. So I wish you all the best, and Ned as well with his great channel, Black Box Online Radio.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening now, so you don't miss a single episode. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac, or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site at zodiacciphers.com or by going to Mike's site at zodiackiller.net.
If you'd like to help more people find Zodiac Speaking, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review of it on your favorite podcast player or app. On behalf of Rich, this is Mike Morford, and I'd like to say thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Zodiac Speaking.